Rosalyn looked at Lucian, gripped by a terrible sense of humiliation. Finally, he wandered around silently and tossed a small box on the table. Then he left the mansion, as if fleeing from death. There was no need to see what was in that box. There must have been a divorce document sealed in it. Rosalyn had told Sir Elliot that if he ever let another stranger into the palace again, she would no longer take his sword, but take him by the throat. If he's not sure who's safe to let in, then let him ask the butler. Why didn't he do that? If you don't understand something, you can ask a higher person. If you want to live here, pacify your pride, said Rosalyn to the guard. After she called for Fenrir and the boy followed her. They went to treat the wound. Luckily it was not deep. Otherwise, they would have had to call a doctor, otherwise they could just apply ointment. Now I'm going to apply the medicine, it might hurt a little, so be patient, said Rosalyn to the boy. As Rosalyn was applying the ointment to Fenrir's face, he felt something in his chest. Fenrir didn't know she had a husband. But Rosalyn didn't care about the man. After all, the reality of their marriage was long lost. The boy did not understand why then did she marry him? The Duchess replied that if they were married, it meant that they loved each other. Of course, and love does not necessarily mean marriage. Ordinary people can live together without love, and she, as a girl of royalty, certainly not. And he didn't seem to understand her. And come to think of it, half-beasts only have one partner for life. You could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't happy. But he just didn't think it was fair. Every time he wonders about something, he asks and she answers him, and here she didn't say a word to him. Rosalyn seemed offended. A look that said, just try to refute what I said. All right, said Rosalyn. What do you want to know? The boy immediately asked, with a disgruntled face. Why did they get married? It seemed to the girl as if he was waiting for her to ask. Was he really curious? She really didn't think it could interest him. It seems because he didn't seem like a kind man. He was the worst of all the men who had proposed to her. But she didn't choose her husband. Her mother picked him out for her. She knew that if presented to her with an incorrigible man, she would try to deal with him. She momentarily became emptier than ever. Her mother, she loved to wear lavishly embellished dresses, and walk around in them on the ball. She wanted her daughter to concentrate on taking care of herself and raising her children like any other woman. From an early age she was more attracted to swords, and later showed a talent for it. She had beaten her brother in battle since she was only 7 points. If she had the opportunity to prove her skills, she did not hesitate. There was also the strength to maintain her talent. She was very friendly with the knights. But to her mother, she seemed to want to raise an army and seize the throne. Her mother told her that if she learned the art of the sword, it would not help her, and that the sword was not her business. But Rosalyn was not interested in the throne. She did not like politics. One could guess, if she were empress and Lucian the emperor, what would come of it. Perhaps the reason for marrying me was to weaken her power. So, in order to restore her reputation, the decision was made to separate from the face of us and marry another man. But divorce was impossible. Because divorce requires the permission of the emperor. His seal also stands on the marriage papers. Her father was on her mother's side. Practically nothing was done without her opinion. Even if she had said she wanted a divorce, in their mind it would have sounded like I aspire to the throne. If she had to say that there was a man she was interested in, the only answer would have been, then we should meet. She was told that if she wanted to, she could have a non-public relationship on the side. If Rosalyn really wanted to come to the throne, she would disdain Lucian and express her intention to marry someone who supported her. In that case, the nobles would have supported her. A divorce could be accomplished if the noblewoman came to the throne. But in order to do that, she would have to come to the throne through battle. She did not want to do that. If she lost in battle, she would become an outcast or at worst die. And if she enters the throne, she will have to live with a headache for the rest of her life. Besides, the emperor's destiny does not end with this alone. She must work hard to avoid being torn apart by hostile forces and must treat her side with suspicion, not trusting it completely. Rosalyn did not love politics enough to live such a life. She had no desire to reform anything. So the present life was the best outcome for her. But there is no need to explain these things. Fortunately, if the emperor who took the seal dies, the couple can divorce by agreement. And so once he passed away, the first thing I did was sign the divorce papers. It had been a long time since she had done that, and Lucian kept avoiding signing. She didn't think she had the courage to do it. Lucian had mentioned the emperor's name. Perhaps he was using it as a cover. The new emperor, too, was not on the side of his only sister, but of her husband, Lucian. His views were not so different from those of his parents. He thought of Rosalina as a stubborn and unreasonable woman who disobeyed her husband. And Lucian is a poor husband who suffers from his selfish and promiscuous wife. How ridiculous, but in any case, this was the story of Lucian and Rosalyn. Although, in fact, there was no story at all. She kicked him out 6 months after he came to this house. By the way, Rosalyn remembered that Fenrir had told her to leave. It seemed to her that he wanted to protect her from Lucian. She looked up at him with her eyes wide open, which made the boy look embarrassed. Boy replied that those who come in with that look on their faces usually don't have good goals. Rosalyn said that people who want to hurt her usually don't come in through the front door. They climb over fences, or climb in a window, or can stealthily poison food. The boy did not understand how someone could want to hurt such a nice girl. If there are such people, it can't be avoided, so now you don't have to worry. Rosalyn said she would protect him, and that he did not have to worry about anyone hurting him. No one will hurt him. It didn't make sense for them to hurt him if they came to kill her. But that wasn't what the boy was worried about. Rosalyn wasn't joking. If it looked like they were going to hurt her, he shouldn't run to her, he should just hide. In a tree or under a bed, as long as he doesn't get hurt. It was Fenrir's way of saying that he was worried about her. Rosalyn went on to say that if anything happened, that he should wait until it had passed, and if she died, let him run without looking back. He could run to Eleanor. At first Rosalyn thought of Eleanor. But there's no guarantee that she'll be safe either, if anything happens to her. But then again, she already knows everything, so it's safer that way. The boy jumped off the table with a serious expression and said he could protect himself. And her too. But Rosalyn didn't seem to like that answer. He couldn't escape 4 times. She admits that he's pretty quick-witted. But even with those abilities, Lucian won't be able to stand up to him. No need to be ashamed of weakness, just calmly accept this defense that is offered to you, Rosalyn said. After these words, the boy disgruntledly left the room, saying he needed to collect all the books her husband had dropped. Rosalyn immediately replied not to call him that. She hated her ex-husband. She was unhappy with the boy's behavior, saying he was in his 20s and acting like a child. When the boy walked out into the hallway, he wondered, he was always being corrupted because his body wasn't growing. However, after coming here, things were different. And he decided, whether Rosalina wanted it or not, he would never leave her alone. After the incident when Lucian made a fuss at the mansion, his name was never heard from Rosalyn or Fenrir again. He no longer returned to the residence since he nearly had his finger cut off. Fenrir, who in many ways looked forward to Lucian's return visit, had to forget about him because of the enormous amount of housework. Once when Fenrir was doing his homework, the Duchess gave him a piece of paper, with Maureen's address written on it. Maureen. Even though she is half-beast, she has citizenship. They say she runs an orphanage for slaves who have nowhere to go. Well, Fenrir didn't know how to navigate addresses. And Rosalyn needed to teach him. As the Duchess was about to go out to the gun store, she asked the boy. Would he like to go out into town with her? It would be better if she showed him where Maureen's house was. The boy needed to have at least one place to hide. Because it wasn't always possible to find one. But the boy knew his ears and tail would scare people. Spilly reassured him that if he went with her, there would be no problem. There are many half-beast slaves who have obtained citizenship and live as if they were citizens of the empire. After that, she was able to take him outside. Since Mistress wanted to buy a sword, Fenrir wanted to go there. Rosalyn said it wasn't urgent, and asked if he wanted to go anywhere else. But the boy didn't know what places there were in town. This is a kid who has no craving for anything. It's probably because of the environment he grew up in. It's not something you can get used to. Maybe if you show Fenrir more scenery, his view of the world will expand a little. The Duchess asked the boy to follow her. She would show him the house whose address she had given him earlier. The boy was very worried that someone would see his ears. But Rosalyn told him not to worry, no one would see his ears through the cap. As they walked through the city, the boy turned his head in all directions. He had never seen such a city. He also felt like someone was always looking at him. When the boy turned away, a woman accidentally pushed him so that his hat flew off. The boy was very afraid someone would see his ears. But the grandmother who pushed him couldn't see very well, so she didn't see his ears. Fenrir quickly put on his cap, looked around to see if anyone had seen his ears. Luckily, no one seemed to see them. But the boy was acting strangely, so passers-by came up to him and asked what happened to him, why he sat down on the road. At this time, Rosalyn had already reached the gun store. When she turned around, she did not see Fenrir beside her. As soon as she started calling out for him, and he came running right away. Rosalyn knew he wasn't lost, just a little behind. She was very glad. She thought he was looking at the houses and streets, following her. But then she noticed the boy's strange behavior. He was sweating for some reason. She knew something was wrong with him. If it was too difficult for him, she offered to come back early. But the boy said there was no problem. And asking her to go on, they entered the gun store. They were immediately greeted by the owner and said hello. Rosalyn didn't see the owner for a long time, and asked how he was doing. The owner admitted that he didn't recognize Rosalyn. It seemed to him that the young lady had grown up, and would no longer break canes as she had done before. He had repeatedly told her that canes were not for fencing, but she did not listen. Rosalyn was a little embarrassed by what her master had said, and said with a slightly disgruntled face that it had been a long time ago. The host replied that even 10 years ago it seemed like yesterday to him. By the way, the owner saw the boy. What kind of young man is that? Rosalyn said that the canes she had purchased before were worn out and she wanted new ones. The owner immediately offered several copies that he had recently made, and offered to look at them. Rosalyn really wanted to look at these canes. The master said they came just in time, they had already been prepared upstairs. As they waited for the master, the boy asked snidely that she had had sword fights with a stick. Rosalyn was a little embarrassed, so she replied that she was young. She was only 12 years old. Her mother had let her carry a sword except in training. The boy asked her again, smiling slyly, why was she making excuses? Then the master intervened in the conversation, and asked Rosalyn to go up to the second floor. Fenrir stayed on the first floor. And Rosalyn said she would be back soon, and that he shouldn't touch anything. He seemed to look calmer than before. The boy calmed her down, told her not to worry. Unlike someone else, he has no interest in sword fights. When Rosalyn went up to the second floor, she saw the new canes. These pieces seemed to have no flaws. The work was truly done by a master craftsman. But to the master's surprise, Rosalyn asked for something simpler, something that would not draw much attention. The owner replied that there were wooden ones without metal ornaments, and suggested one particular cane. Originally, it was not made in their store, but after a gentleman ordered it a few years ago, the owner did a lot of research on it. And the owner suggested that Rosalyn look at this cane. When she took it, she felt that this cane did not weigh like a piece of wood, and they are usually much thinner. It was a sword hidden in the cane. The owner liked that the Duchess knew what it was at once. Said that the man who ordered this cane was also learning to wield a sword, so he thought it would suit her, too. Really liked the thing, but she said she no longer held the sword. Hearing her refusal, the master suggested now to sharpen a fully customized cane for her. If she was in no hurry to go anywhere, Rosalyn said that would be best. Suddenly they heard some noise together on the first floor. Rosalyn realized something was going on there. It sounded like Fenner was doing something. When they got down to the first floor, they saw that everything was broken and scattered. And the strange thing was, Fenrir wasn't there. Rose immediately rushed outside to look for him. It was starting to rain heavily. As she searched for him, she got soaked and went back to her owner's shop without finding him. She didn't know who could have done it, but it was clear that Fenrir had disappeared. Rosalyn was sitting waiting for her assistants in the owner's shop when one of the guards suddenly walked in. He reported that they had searched all around, but could not find him. She immediately contacted her residence and mobilized more than 10 knights. And then sent this squad to search for Fenrir in the capital. The only clue they got was a woman's account of her encounter with him. She wanted to help him and take him home, but he ran away. The guards though I had searched the place, but it was almost impossible to find him, for Fenrir is very good at hiding. Rosalyn already thought it would be better for him if she didn't find him. But if he was kidnapped? No, she didn't want to think about that. That woman said that when she ran into him, he was alone. At least he was fast enough to run away from the threat, but damn it, where had he gone? Fenrir knew only 2 places, the Duchess estate and Maureen's house. But today was the first time they'd ridden the wagon, so he didn't know the way back to the mansion. So the only place he could go is Maureen's house, but he hasn't heard from her. Perhaps she should have gone there herself. The landlord was reassuring the Rosalyn as best he could. He said the child would be found soon, for he could not have run far. Drinking in the tea, Rosalyn decided to go on the search, too. The knight immediately tried to talk her out of this villainy, and said the child would soon be found. And the Duchess might get sick. Even if she searches for him. Before he could finish, he suddenly felt the audio of the Duchess, who was unhappy with what he was saying. Suddenly the doors opened and one of the knights pushed some man. He said he found him in the alley. It looked like he was the one who had taken the child. When the Duchess saw this man, she angrily started beating him. He wanted to justify himself and said he was sorry. He didn't think the Duchess was the owner of the boy. But Rosalyn didn't want to listen, she kept beating the poor man. When he fell down exhausted, Rosalyn stepped on him with her foot and asked where he was doing Fenrir. The man replied that he didn't put it on anywhere. The boy suddenly ran away. He just did what he was told. He didn't know that Rosalyn was his mistress. Rosalyn asked where he had been caught. The knight replied that it wasn't far away at all. He was running and kicking, and he had to drag him, so maybe he lost sight of the baby. Perhaps he got lost trying to get back. Rosalyn thought this man was in a gang, so she ordered that each of them be caught. And to find out any information, even if she had to pry it out by force. After she gave the order to the knights, she turned to the master. She was very sorry that this had happened. Fenrir could return at any moment, so she would stay here another day and then return the favor. Afterward, she ordered the knights to take care of the owner, and she would go in search of him. But the knight was against such a venture. He suggested that she stay here and wait. After all, he might return himself, as she had said earlier. But the Duchess was very worried about him, saying that maybe he was being watched closely, so he could not run away, and also armed knights were looking for him, maybe he was hiding from them too. Despite even such words of the Duchess, the knight did not want her to go, but the Duchess insisted on his own. And so as not to get wet, she went looking for Fenrir with an umbrella. She walked from place to place where Fenrir might have been. She came to the place where the bandit was found. The place where the woman encountered Fenrir. But he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly she stumbled into some alley. If she continued in this direction, she would come out as an extreme city. This is the road, well known to him, is the way back to the mansion. The Duchess remembered that Fenrir kept looking out the window as he rode in the carriage. Perhaps it was because he was bored, or maybe the scenery outside simply drew attention, or maybe he had another purpose. She passed through the streets one by one, but found no sign of Fenrir anywhere. The last place he could be was the city park, which looked like a forest. Fenrir has a habit of seeking higher ground when he is in danger. This place is so densely planted with trees that it forms a small forest. Unlike bare buildings, the park is better suited for shelter. Fenrir is smart enough not to overstretch himself in a child's body and take that into consideration. But it would be safer to get in the carriage and head back to the mansion. Fenrir remembered the crest on the chariot, so he would recognize it. In these reflections, Rosalyn stumbled upon a large tree in the center of the forest. She saw Fenrir lying on a huge branch, not telling him to come down to go home. They captured whoever was hunting him. Now, he is safe. Fenrir replied sadly, how can she not understand? He's not safe anywhere. Because he was born that way. Wherever he goes,